A man called Priest pulled his cowboy hat down at the front and peered across the flat, dusty desert of South Texas. The low, dull green bushes of thorny mesquite and sagebrush stretched in every direction as far as he could see. In front of him, a ridged and rutted track 10 feet wide had been driven through the vegetation. These tracks were called senderos by the Hispanic bulldozer drivers, who cut them in brutally straight lines. On one side, at precise 50-yard intervals, bright pink plastic marker flags fluttered on short wire poles. A truck moved slowly along the sendero. Priest had to steal the truck. He had stolen his first vehicle at the age of 11, a brand-new snow-white 1961 Lincoln Continental parked with the keys in the dash outside the Roxy Theater on South Broadway in Los Angeles. Priest, who was called Ricky in those days, could hardly see over the steering wheel. He had been so scared he almost wet himself, but he drove it 10 blocks and handed the keys proudly to Jimmy Pigface Riley, who gave him $5, then took his girl for a drive and crashed the car on the Pacific Coast Highway. That was how Ricky became a member of the Pigface gang. But this truck was not just a vehicle. As he watched, the powerful machinery behind the driver's cabin slowly lowered a massive steel plate, 6 feet square, to the ground. There was a pause, then he heard a low-pitched rumble. A cloud of dust rose around the truck as the plate began to pound the earth rhythmically. He felt the ground shake beneath his feet. This was a seismic vibrator, a machine for sending shockwaves through the Earth's crust. Priest had never had much education except in stealing cars, but he was the smartest person he had ever met, and he understood how the vibrator worked. It was similar to radar and sonar. The shock waves were reflected off features in the earth, such as rock or liquid, and they bounced back to the surface, where they were picked up by listening devices called geophones, or jugs. Priest worked on the jug team. They had planted more than 1,000 geophones at precisely measured intervals in a grid a mile square. Every time the vibrator shook, the reflections were picked up by the jugs and recorded by a supervisor working in a trailer known as the doghouse. All this data would later be fed into a supercomputer in Houston to produce a 3-dimensional map of what was under the Earth's surface. The map would be sold to an oil company. The vibrations rose in pitch, making a noise like the mighty engines of an ocean liner gathering speed. Then the sound stopped abruptly. Priest ran along the sendero to the truck, screwing up his eyes against the billowing dust. He opened the door and clambered up into the cabin. A stocky, black-haired man of about 30 was at the wheel. "Hey, Mario," Priest said as he slid into the seat alongside the driver. "Hey, Ricky." Richard Granger was the name on Priest's commercial driving license, Class B. The license was forged, but the name was real. He was carrying a carton of Marlboro cigarettes, the brand Mario smoked. He tossed the carton onto the dash. "Here, I brought you something." "Hey, man, you don't need to buy me no cigarettes. I'm always bumming your smokes." He picked up the open pack on the dash, shook one out, and put it in his mouth. Mario smiled. "Why don't you just buy your own cigarettes?" "Hell no. I can't afford to smoke." "You're crazy, man." Mario laughed. Priest lit his cigarette. He had always had an easy ability to get on with people, make them like him. On the streets where he grew up, people beat you up if they didn't like you, and he had been a runty kid. So he had developed an intuitive feel for what people wanted from him, deference, affection, humor, whatever, and the habit of giving it to them quickly. In the oil field, what held the men together was humor, usually mocking, sometimes clever, often obscene. Although he had been here only 2 weeks, Priest had won the trust of his co-workers. But he had not figured out how to steal the seismic vibrator. And he had to do it in the next few hours, for tomorrow the truck was scheduled to be driven to a new site 700 miles away, near Clovis, New Mexico. His vague plan was to hitch a ride with Mario. The trip would take 2 or 3 days. The truck, which weighed 40,000 pounds, had a highway speed of around 40 miles per hour. At some point, he would get Mario drunk or something, then make off with the truck. He had been hoping a better plan would come to him, but inspiration had failed so far. "My car's dying," he said. "You want to give me a ride as far as San Antonio tomorrow?" Mario was surprised. "You ain't coming all the way to Clovis?" "Nope." He waved a hand at the bleak desert landscape. "Just look around," he said. "Texas is so beautiful, man. I never want to leave." Mario shrugged. There was nothing unusual about a restless transient in this line of work. "Sure, I'll give you a ride." It was against company rules to take passengers, but the drivers did it all the time. "Meet me at the dump." Priest nodded. The garbage dump was a desolate hollow, full of rusting pickups and smashed TV sets and verminous mattresses on the outskirts of Shiloh, the nearest town. No one would be there to see Mario pick him up, unless it was a couple of kids shooting snakes with a .22 caliber rifle. "What time?" "Let's say 6. I'll bring coffee." Priest needed this truck. He felt his life depended on it. His palms itched to grab Mario right now and throw him out and just drive away. But that was no good. For one thing, Mario was almost 20 years younger than Priest and might not let himself be thrown out so easily. For another, the theft had to go undiscovered for a few days. Priest needed to drive the truck to California and hide it before the nation's cops were alerted to watch out for a stolen seismic vibrator. There was a beep from the radio, indicating that the supervisor in the doghouse had checked the data from the last vibration and found no problems. Mario raised the plate, put the truck in gear, and moved forward 50 yards, pulling up exactly alongside the next pink marker flag. Then he lowered the plate again and sent a ready signal.